Hey, what I want to do is I don't really want to tell you John Hance stories so much as I would like to tell you real John Hance stories, real honest-to-God stuff that John Hance was involved in. And that was obviously Hance's Trail. And I want to tie that into other things that, how to say, eventuated from that. Okay, so in 1884, you had two roads that went around the San Francisco peaks, the western route and the eastern route, and they met at Hull Ranch, or Cedar Ranch as it was called. In June of that year, Hance, Hull, and others ran a road down from the rim down to Hull Ranch. That was the only road that connected Grand Canyon to the rest of the world. So the train was already in place in Flagstaff. People started to go to Grand Canyon on this road. Here's where they went. Here is Hull Cabin, a mile south of the rim. This is Hance cabin called Glendale Springs. And just as a point of interest, both of these cabins were saddle notched, one room, small affairs. And because of that, I think they were built about the same time. Now, John Hance had a homestead, and that was called Glendale Springs. But you see, I have it here in orange. And the reason I have it in orange is because he never had it surveyed. In other words, he was squatting on land, okay? And he squatted there all the way up until the time he sold it. And we'll get to, well, sold it the last time. Okay, and from the unsurveyed land here, you have a toll road, but actually it's an illegal toll road because he never recorded it in Yavapai County Toll Roads book. Okay, so he's living illegally, he's running an he's making money on a trail, right, which should have been recorded. So I don't want to call him a shady operation, but I mean, Grand Canyon was off the map in '84, essentially. So I think his thought was, why bother? But at any rate, went down Hance Creek to the junction of West Hand Creek and continued on to Sockdolliger Rapid. Hance Trail did not go to an asbestos mine. That part happened later. You could spend a night at Hance's Ranch in a cot, in a tent, and spend in today's money, $325 to do that. Or you could also just show up independently and hike down the trail, and you could spend $1, which would now equal $28. You could hire a pack animal for twice that, and Hance also featured group rates for rim rides. This is 1892. This is the heyday of Hance's Trail, and this is Hance's Trail. Okay? You see that? It's just almost straight downhill. It's scree, it's slippery, it's steep. And right here, just as a matter of interest, here's Thomas Moran. Okay, and on the right here, we have a couple of drawings he produced during that trip. The junction of East and West Hance Creeks, Hance had a rock cabin there. He called it Cottonwood Camp. Here's the exterior view, the interior view. Here's Moran right here, and Hance. On a day like today, he would have a tarp over the joist there, a fire in the fireplace, and probably be pretty comfy. The first time John Hance went to the river, he told George Wharton James, "I picked up a piece of hard granite and scratched my name in the sandstone rock. This is a panel that's down there in the area, and right there it says J.H. Now, John Hance, I don't really know, but possibility. This is the first 3 years of John Hance's visitors book. And all these people in those first 3 years certified in the book that they went to the river. Okay? And this is also the last 3 years of John Hance's Trail as, how to say, Grand Canyon's single attraction. Other things were starting to happen by 1893. But, oops, that's over 60 individuals in 3 years, if you count them, And then you have others not recorded in the book, but I'll show you some examples of that. And basically, if you average that out, that's 33 people a year for 8 years went down Hance's trail. I think that number's low. I think there were probably more than that. The first one that didn't sign a book or anything and wrote about it in a very circuitous way, but actually certified that he did go to the river, was a guy called Hal the Scribe. I have no idea who Hal the Scribe was, but he published in the newspaper a series of articles. A year later, Edward Ayer, his wife, Emma here, and friends and children from Chicago came to Grand Canyon. They went down the trail, and this is the first widely, advertised journey to the river. Edward Ayer wrote about it. It was also publicized in the newspaper. Now, here's some folks that signed John Hance's visitor's book, okay? But they didn't say they went to the river. They just signed in. And this is the Carroll group out of Flagstaff. They would go on to own the Carrollton Hotel in town briefly. But we do have some album and prints of their journey to the river. This is obviously Old Hance Trail. It's the only trail in town at this point. This is more obviously Old Hance Trail. Pretty steep, right? You need ropes. And here we are at the river on the left there. On the right, this is the mouth of Hance Creek before the advent of Glen Canyon Dam. That's John Hance there. And I think that's probably the same day that he saw a fish go by. It was so big it took it all day to do the job. Now, it's said that Hance Trail washed out in 1894. That's marginally true, probably, but when Toll-Free Brothers took over Glendale Springs, and they're coming in the next slide, when they took over, they also prohibited Hance from working on his trail. So steep, slippery, almost non-existent as it was, it also, beginning in 1893, when they took over, he was not allowed on the trail to do maintenance. So it obviously fell into disrepair, such as it was. But just as a point of interest, these photos here are from 1898. So the trail was still in use in 1898, and this is obviously Sockdolager Rapid. Okay, and it was probably used a little bit off and on right up until the time that the train pulled in. Okay, here are the Toll-Free Brothers. Lyman is the name we're familiar with here in Grand Canyon. He was the man on the ground. James was his older brother. They offered Fred Harvey-style service out in Southern California. They made a lot of improvements to Hance's operation. They put a shingle roof on the Cottonwood Camp structure. They took this roped descent of, They took this rope descent of Moran's Falls. And this is Old Hance Trail here. This is another aspect of Old Hance Trail. They took a rope descent and turned it into a hanging ladder, which actually looks a lot safer and much more secure. My opinion. They bought this illegal property, right? I mean, it's never surveyed. Hance can't legally transfer it. They turned it into this in 1894. In 1895, with the aid of the Santa Fe Railway, Hance installed this cabin at the head of Old Hance Trail. This cabin is dovetail joined, just like Whole Barn is dovetail joined. And because of that, I think those two buildings were built about the same time. Okay, the juniper tree on the left is still the juniper tree on the left. And right here, this is what remains of Old Hance Trail, really. You follow that a couple hundred yards down the slalom course, and after that, it just basically disappears. It's not there anymore. In 1896, by 1896, Toll-Free Brothers had added the dining room, the kitchen, and what they called the library. And then Toll-Free Brothers Actually, they had a lot of business, but they spent a lot of money, and they withdrew from Grand Canyon, and now we're going to step over to Red Canyon Trail for a bit. Okay, Red Canyon Trail, or toll road, grew up alongside of Hance Trail and at about the same time, but for different reasons. Bill Ashurst, John Marshall, and others were in the canyon during the winter months, and they needed a forage for their stock. And so what they did was they carved out a route down to Tonto Platform. But they discovered that, sure enough, it went simply enough all the way down to the river. So Hance set up a camp down at the river. Then in 1891, when Bill Ashurst discovered the Wool Claim, which is also called the Hance asbestos mine, okay? But Bill Ashurst staked that and recorded it. It was his name is the only name on the record. That trail continued downstream across the river and ended up at exiting the canyon at Clear Creek, and the whole passage was about 28 miles. This button's not cooperating. So I always wondered, where did the trail cross the river? Okay? Up above you have Google Earth, and down below you've got the 1906 plat of 16 Hance Asbestos Mining Company claims. And notice the Wool Claim, I have that in orange. So that means Hance didn't own it, right? Yeah. Okay, real good. Just checking. Come on, baby. Okay. When you take the plat and you scale it and put it where it belongs, right here, you may not be able to see it, but it says boat landing. Okay? So this is a boat landing. That's number 1 claim. And sorry. You saw it above? Okay. So here's a view to the south on 11,500 cubic feet. And the reason I mention the cubic feet is because I think that is given the boating skills of the time and the way that, and all the equipment and stock you had to get from the south side to the north side, and the asbestos you had to get back across the river in a rowboat, then put back on burros, and then up the trail. I think 11,000 is way too much water for the times. I think you had to have water, maybe half of that, maybe even less. And if you look at the newspapers, you'll see that that's when they were moving asbestos across the river, was in the winter months. Here's the view to the north side. Here's number 1 claim right there in the middle of the photo. Okay, ephemera from Red Canyon Trail or toll road amounts to a few things. This is John Hance's hand-drawn map of the route when he recorded it, all righty? And it's the only piece of paper I know of that's wholly crafted in John Hance's hand. Outside the signatures of the other folks that I forgot to mention as I flashed by there. But there's those signatures. The whole thing is in John Hance's hand. We have, thanks to Doug Nearing's great research and presentation in 2012, we have a photo and some information of the lower Vishnu Creek rock structure. Again, that's in orange. That wasn't Hance's cabin either. I think it was probably just a halfway house, a way station for folks coming in from the North Rim to work at the asbestos mine and do some local prospecting. We have a great photo of Hance on Red Canyon Toll Road. And I love this picture because these guys are all dressed up like it's Sunday and they're going to church. And this is very typical dress of the day for people visiting Grand Canyon and going down trails. Okay? And then you have Hance out right there in the middle leading the charge down the hill, and he's pretty well decked out too. He's got a nice vest and hat on. Okay, we have a photo of the camp at Hance Rapid, right? And I think that this operation only was in service for as a commercial tourist enterprise, maybe 6-8 years. The trail was mostly used by miners, but and it was used here. But as soon as the train pulled in, everybody migrated to that part of the world, and this was left all by its lonesome. Meanwhile, back at Glendale Springs, James Thurber put a roof and a porch on and a couple of Sibley stoves in the tents. But what he really did was he took a stage route over to a place he built with the aid of the Santa Fe called Bright Angel Trail, or a hotel. Why did he do that? These guys had been down the trail, Hance's trail, and had been prospecting. And in March of 1890, they staked 2 claims just below Pipe Creek. Then they started working around Indian Gardens. And in later affidavits, we know what happened at Indian Gardens. This is Ralph Cameron's, one of Ralph Cameron's statements. And he talks about being there for a couple months, looking over the slope to the south, thinking about building a trail to get to mining claims and avoid the lengthy commute from Hance Trail. Okay, this is M.T. Black, who built the eastern route to Grand Canyon. Among others, he certified that prior to the latter part of 1890, there was no sign or semblance of any trail right there where Bright Angel Trail now is. So in other words, Bright Angel Trail, according to affidavits, and that's what I'm going by for the presentation, was built to get to mining claims, and it did not follow an ancient Native American route to the rim. It was just carved out and blasted into all by itself. Pete Berry recorded Bright Angel Toll Road in January of 1891. It did not appear in the press and then as a mining route until 1893. But in 1901, 10 years later, after the train pulled in, 300 people visited Bright Angel Trail in one day. And that was more people than saw Glendale Springs in an entire year. Okay, and that day, Bright Angel Trail became Grand Canyon's still most traveled footpath. Martin Buglin took over after Hance finally had his homestead patent in hand in 1907, the first patent he had. Okay, Buglin built the Buglin V-Bar V Hotel. He died in the 30s. His wife hung on to it until 47. Sold it to the Park Service that year, and they kept it until 1957, when indigents were living in the structures, and they tore it down. And what you see at Glendale Springs now is kind of like what Hance would have seen at Glendale Springs. In closing, and as an interpretive matter, I would like to suggest that Buglin Picnic Area, nothing against Buglin, be repurposed as Hance Picnic Area. And the reason I say that is because I don't think John has received the notice that he deserves in his place in the development of Grand Canyon as a tourist destination, and also the role that his trail played in that. Buglin has parking, it has toilets, it has picnic area. All it needs is really a few kiosks that tell the story of early day tourism. Thanks very much.